the legendary Battle of Rorke's Drift, which took place between January 22nd and 23rd in the year 1879, is a monument to courage and perseverance in the midst of insurmountable obstacles. Situated in the secluded South African mission station of Rorke's Drift, a small band of 150 British soldiers heroically held their ground against a massive army of about 4,000 Zulu fighters at the height of the Anglo-Zulu War. British defenders, under the command of Lieutenants John Chard and Gonville Bromhead, withstood relentless onslaughts by combining clever strategy, well-fortified defenses, and unflinching bravery. The troops held their ground in the face of overwhelming odds and constant enemy attacks, killing or wounding a large number of Zulus and resulting in a stunning triumph. In addition to showcasing the incredible bravery of the British soldiers, the heroic stand at Rorke's Drift became a literary and cinematic icon, a manifestation of unwavering resolve. Hello and welcome. Here we go today, do a little bit of English, a little bit of African history, I suppose. I suppose it's colonial history. It is the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Now I'm assuming that you've seen the old film starring Michael Caine, which has a fantastic portrayal of the battle. If you have not, I will assign it to you as homework. It's a little bit dated, but don't let that turn you off. The old movies are better than the new ones, especially the historical films. Now, without further ado, do the like and comment and subscribe thing and we can begin. So, Rorke's Drift, known in the Zulu language as Jim's Land, or in their rendering, Kwajimu, held significant historical and strategic importance in the late 19th century. Originally, it was a modest trading post, founded by its namesake James Rorke, an Irish-born merchant who migrated to the Eastern Cape. It was situated at a vital crossing point on the Buffalo River. The river acted as a natural boundary between the powerful Zulu kingdom and the British colonial territory of Natal, making Rorke's Drift a focal point in the unfolding military campaign. But the site later became a mission station, managed by none other than the Church of Sweden, adding a layer of humanitarian purpose to its strategic location. On January the 9th, 1879, the British No. 3 Centre Column, under the command of Lord Chelmsford, arrived at this point and established a camp. This movement was part of a larger British plan to exact military pressure on the Zulu kingdom following the expiration of an ultimatum demanding Zulu compliance with British terms. 2 days later, January the 11th, Chelmsford's column crossed the river and set up a forward position on the Zulu-controlled bank, signifying a clear escalation of hostilities. The post at Rorke's Drift was subsequently adapted for military use, being transformed into a hospital and supply depot. The strategic conversion was overseen by the experienced Brevet Major Henry Spaulding, a senior member of Chelmsford's staff from the 104th Foot Regiment. To defend this makeshift stronghold, a small garrison consisting of B Company, 2nd Battalion, the 24th Regiment of Foot, was placed under the command of Lieutenant Gonville Bromhead, a capable yet relatively junior officer, noted for his quiet demeanor. Preparatory efforts included reconnaissance patrols and the construction of an essential wagon track to facilitate the movement of supplies and equipment. Now, with all these measures in place, Chelmsford led the main body of the army away from Rorke's Drift on January 20th, advancing approximately 6 miles east to the encampment of Isandlwana. Recognizing the vulnerability of the remaining garrison, the British command reinforced it with a detachment of the 2nd and 3rd Natal Native Contingent, usually abbreviated to the NNC. This force, commanded by Captain William Stevenson, added a fluctuating number of local troops, estimated to range from 100 to 350 men. These men, though crucial to pad out the numbers, were often less armed and, of course, less trained than their British counterparts. To further bolster the defensive position, Captain Thomas Rainforth's G Company of the 1st and 24th Foot was instructed to proceed from their post at Helpmacar, located 10 miles southeast of Rorke's Drift. Their movement aimed to fortify the mission station with additional troops capable of sustaining defensive operations. On the night of January 21st, Brevet Colonel Anthony Durnford led a detachment from the Royal Engineers No. 2 Column to Rorke's Drift. This unit established a temporary encampment on the Zulu side of the riverbank, emphasizing the forward military posture of the British forces in the region. Late on the evening of January 21st, Durnford and a small detachment of the No. 5 Field Company Royal Engineers, led by Lieutenant John Chard, were given the order to go to Isandlwana. They had arrived on the 19th to repair the pontoons that were used to bridge the Buffalo River. Chard travelled to Isandlwana in advance of his detachment on the morning of January 22nd in order to obtain clarification on the orders he had obtained. On the other hand, he was given the directive to return to Rorke's Drift with only his wagon and its driver in order to establish defensive positions for the anticipated reinforcement company. On the way back, he was to pass Durnford's column. At approximately noon on the 22nd of January, Major Spaulding departed the station in order to travel to Helpmacar, in order to discover the location of Rainforth's G Company, which had already missed its deadline. He appointed Chard to the position of temporary command leader. Chard rode down to make his way to the engineers' camp, which was located on the drift itself. Lieutenant Gert Adenorf of the 1st and 3rd National Corps, and a trooper from the Natal Carbineers, 2 survivors from Isandlwana, arrived shortly with the news of the defeat and the approach of a Zulu contingent to the station. Both of these individuals were arriving with bad news. And so a brief meeting was held between Chard, Bromhead, and another station officer, acting assistant commissary James Dalton, who was affiliated with the Commissariat and Transport Department. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the situation and determine whether they should attempt to defend their current position or retreat to Helpmacar. When Dalton pointed out that a small column traveling through the open country while carrying carts full of hospital patients would be easily overtaken and defeated by a Zulu force that was numerically superior, it was quickly decided that staying put and fighting was the only viable option. It didn't take them long to come to this decision. And so, following the British officer's decision to remain, Chard and Bromhead gave orders to their men to get ready to defend the station. With the help of approximately 400 men who were stationed at the garrison, a defensive perimeter was constructed in a short amount of time, by utilizing mealie bags, crates of canned meat, and biscuit boxes. This perimeter contained a kraal made of stone that was sturdy, as well as the hospital and the repository. In order to fortify the structures, certain pieces of furniture were placed in front of the exterior doors, and loopholes, also known as firing holes, were punched through the exterior walls. Approximately 100 Natal native horse were part of the mixed troop that arrived at the station at approximately 3:30 in the afternoon. Lieutenant Alfred Henderson was in charge of the troop. Following the completion of a well-coordinated withdrawal from Isandlwana, this event took place here. The Oscarberg, Shiane, was a large hill that provided a view of the station, and was anticipated to be approached by the Zulus from behind. They proposed setting up a picket line on the opposite side of the Oscarberg, where the Zulus were expected to approach from behind. At a time when the defenses were coming to an end, and the battle was getting closer, Chard had several hundred men available to him. Henderson's troop, Stevenson's sizable NNC company, Bromhead's B Company, and the other men, mostly hospital patients, the walking wounded, from a variety of British and colonial units, were among the individuals who were included in this group. In spite of the fact that the soldier who had accompanied Adenoff on his journey continued to gallop forward in order to inform the garrison at Helpmakar, Adendorf remained behind as well. It was Chard's belief that the force would indeed be sufficient to drive the Zulus away, or at least frighten them off with the gunfire. Chard then added some more of the capable patients who could wield weapons along with civilians and casuals, members of the NNC who were armed to the barricade. He then positioned the British soldiers around the perimeter. The remaining members of the NNC, who were only armed with spears unfortunately, were positioned outside the barricade that consisted of mealie bags and biscuit boxes, located in the stone-walled cattle kraal. Now, next thing you're going to have to excuse some of the Zulu pronunciation. The Indlu Yengwe Ibutho, which was comprised of young men who were not married, and the Udluko, the Uthulwana, and the Indlono Amabutho, regiments of married men in their 30s and 40s, mustered between 3,000 and 4,000 fighters, none of which took part in the battle that took place at Isandlwana. The Zulu force that was coming in was significantly larger. Isandlwana was the location where this Zulu force, known as the Undi Corps, served as the loins or reserve of the army. It was given the order to swing wide of the British left flank, or pass west and south of Isandlwana Hills itself, in order to position itself across the line of communication and retreat that the British and their colonial allies were using. In order to prevent them from escaping back into Natal through the Buffalo River Ford, which is the path that leads to Rorke's Drift, this had to be done. Approximately 20 miles in the blazing sun had been fast marched by the Undi Corps from the morning encampment that they left at approximately 8 in the morning. By the time they arrived at Rorke's Drift at 4:30 in the afternoon, they had spent approximately 11.5 hours continuously marching. A cowhide Ungi shield and an assegai, also known as a short spear, were the majority of the equipment that the Zulu warriors carried. Both in terms of strategy and in terms of personal technique, the Zulu army practiced using this weapon. Some Zulus were in possession of old muskets, obsolete rifles, and some captured Martini Henrys that were utilized by the defenders. This was despite the fact that their marksmanship training was inadequate, and the supply of powder and shot was limited. What they did have supplied was of poor quality. May as well just stick to what they know. The spears. Old faithful. Even though their fire was inaccurate, it was responsible for 5 of the 17 deaths that occurred in the British territory at Rorke's Drift. The Zulu believed that it was important that the generality of Zulu warriors, however, would not have firearms, the arms of a coward, as they said, but they enabled the poltroon to kill the brave without waiving his attack. The Undi Corps was led by Inkosi Kamapitha during the Isandlwana battle. However, after Kamapitha sustained an injury while pursuing British survivors from Isandlwana, the commander of the Undi Corps was transferred to Prince Dabulamanzi Kampande, who was the half-brother of the Zulu king, Kestwayo Kampande. Prince Dabulamanzi was considered to be reckless and aggressive due to the fact that he had disregarded King Seshwayo's directive to act solely in defense of Zulu territory against the British soldiers and to refrain from carrying the war across the border into enemy territory. As the main body of the Undi Corps Zulus advanced onto Rorke's Drift, many of them broke off to raid other African kraals and homesteads. As a result, the attack on Rorke's Drift was classified as an impromptu raid, rather than a coordinated counter-invasion. Surgeon James Reynolds, Army Chaplain Reverend George Smith, and Otto Witt, the Swedish missionary who oversaw the mission at Rorke's Drift, descended from the Oscarberg hillside at approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, when the news of the Zulu body was no more than 5 minutes away, and was crossing the river to the southeast. It was at this point that Witt made the decision to leave the station, because he desired to be with his family, who resided in a remote farmhouse approximately 19 miles from the station. In addition to Witt, one of the patients at the hospital, Lieutenant Thomas Purvis of the 1st 3rd National Corps, and Witt's native servant left also. At approximately 4:20 p.m., the NNH troops under Lieutenant Henderson's command engaged the vanguard of the main Zulu force for a brief period of time. They were positioned behind the Oscarberg. The men under Henderson's command, on the other hand, departed for Helpmekar because they were worn out from the conflict at Isandlwana, and retreat to Rorke's Drift had made them tired. They also had run out of ammunition for their carbines. It was Henderson himself who conveyed to Lieutenant Chard the information that his men would not obey his orders, but were going off to Helpmekar, and that the adversary was in close proximity. After that, Henderson began to follow his men as they departed. After witnessing Henderson's NNH troop withdraw, Captain Stevenson's NNC company fled the cattle kraal, which resulted in a significant reduction in the strength of the garrison that was defending the area. Angry British soldiers were responsible for the death of Corporal William Anderson. You see, they were enraged by the fact that Stevenson and a few of his colonial NCOs had also managed to escape from the barricades. As of this moment, the garrison consisted of approximately 154 to 156 men, and the Zulus were very close. Between all of these, the only one that could be considered a unified entity was Bromhead's men. In addition, there were as many as 39 members of his company who were hospitalized at the station. However, only a small number of them were able to take up arms. Chard came to the conclusion that the defences needed to be altered because there were fewer men. He gave the order for the biscuit boxes to be used in the construction of a wall that would run through the middle of the post. This would allow the hospital side of the station to be abandoned, if it was necessary to do so. At approximately 4:30 p.m., the Zulus made their way around the Oscarberg and approached the south wall. Private Frederick Hitch, who was serving as the lookout on the top of the storehouse, reported that a large group of Zulus was approaching. An assault was launched by the 600 members of the Zulu vanguard against the south wall, which served as a connection between the storehouse and the hospital. The Zulus, commanded by Indluyengwe, were approximately 500 yards away when the British began to volley fire their weapons. Some of the Zulu force that was attacking sought cover, but they were either pinned down by the ongoing British fire, or they withdrew to the Oscarberg terraces. Meanwhile, the majority of the Zulu force moved to attack the north wall. At that location, they started firing their own weapons. While this was going on, another Zulu force made its way around the corner of the northwest wall and the hospital. There was soon intense hand-to-hand combat between the British on the barricades, including Dalton and Bromhead. The Zulus had to crouch beneath the British wall in order to try to seize the defenders' Martini Henry rifles, slash at the British soldiers with assegais, or fire their weapons through the wall, because the wall was too high for them to climb. In order to push the Brits off the walls, they occasionally clambered over each other's bodies, but they were pushed back. 5 of the 17 defenders who were killed or mortally wounded in the action were hit while at the north wall, and there were few casualties from the Zulu fire from both those under the wall around the Oscarberg. Chard realized that the north wall could not hold because the Zulus were attacking it constantly and so fiercely. He dragged his men back into the yard at 6 p.m., leaving the hospital's front 2 rooms behind. The Zulus, who were still being shot, grabbed at the protruding rifles. But if the holes were left unoccupied, the Zulu warriors would stick their own weapons through to fire into the rooms, making the hospital unworkable. Privates Cole, Dunbar, Horrigan, Hitch, John Williams, Joseph Williams, Alfred Henry Hook, Robert Jones, and William Jones were among the soldiers assigned to the hospital, along with Corporal William Wilson Allen. They chose to switch to revolvers, since they were running low on the Henry pellets or rifle ammunition. Using bayonets and revolvers, Privates Horrigan, Williams, Joseph Williams, and other patients attempted to block the hospital entrance. 14 dead Zulus were later discovered beneath the small window that Joseph Williams had himself defended. John Williams started hacking a way out of the wall that separated the hospital's central room for a corner room in the back as it became evident that the Zulus were taking control of the front of the building. The Zulus then launched a fierce attack on the central room door as he made a passable breach, and he barely had time to pull 2 bedridden patients out before the door collapsed. Private Hook and 9 other patients were in the corner room where John Williams had dragged the 2 patients. A firefight broke out as the Zulus fired through the door and Hook returned fire, striking his helmet and leaving him stunned as John Williams used his bayonet to cut the wall leading to the next room. Williams dragged the patients through the hole, which was large enough to reach the next room, which was only occupied by patient Private Waters. Hook was the last man out, and before he dove through the hole, he killed a few Zulus who had knocked down the door. 50 minutes later, the hole was big enough to pull all the patients through, and Privates Robert Jones and William Jones were protecting the majority of the men in the final room. The patients then navigated across the yard to the barricade after scrambling out through a window. While hiding in a wardrobe, Private Waters and Beckett suffered injuries, and Waters eventually passed away from the wounds suffered from the Zulu spears. All of the able-bodied men and 9 of the 11 patients made it to the barricade. James Henry Reynolds reported that 4 defenders were killed in the hospital. Private Jenkins and Sergeant Maxfield, who refused to be moved due to a fever, were also killed, as was an NNC member who had a broken leg. Jenkins and Private Adams reportedly refused to move, and both were stabbed after being apprehended. When Private Cole, who was assigned to the hospital, ran outside, he was also killed. Trooper Hunter of the Natal Mounted Police was another hospital patient who died. Trooper Green of the Natal Mounted Police, who was shot in the thigh. Corporal Mayer of the NNC and Bombardier Lewis of the Royal Artillery were among the hospital patients who did manage to flee. Hook pulled Private Conley, who had a broken leg, to safety, but in the process, Conley had broke his leg even worse than it was before. The perimeter was shortened after the burning hospital was evacuated. The Zulu attacks intensified as night fell. The British troops withdrew to the center of the station where a last defense had been hurriedly constructed, and the remaining men were left in a small bastion surrounding the storehouse after the cattle kraal was evacuated by 10 p.m. due to renewed attacks. The Zulus continued the attack on the British positions throughout the night, and the attacks only slowed after midnight and ended by 2 a.m., after which they were replaced by harassing Zulu gunfire after 4 a.m. The garrison had suffered 14 fatalities at this point. 8 people, including Dalton, suffered serious injuries, and 2 more were killed. Nearly all of the men were wounded in some way or another. After fighting for almost 10 hours and running out of ammunition, they were completely spent. Only 900 of the 20,000 rounds that were in reserve at the mission were left. The British could see that the Zulus, as dawn broke, had vanished, leaving only the dead and those 2 injured to flee. Patrols were sent out for survivors, recover rifles, and scout the battlefield. Many of them were killed when they were discovered. When an impi of Zulus unexpectedly materialized around 7 a.m., the British remanned their positions. However, since the Zulus had been on the move for 6 days before the battle and not eaten properly for 2 of those days, no attack came to pass. They were days away from any supplies and had hundreds of wounded in their ranks, and so the Zulus quickly departed their original path as quick as they had appeared. The defenders left their breakfast to reman their positions when another force arrived around 8 a.m. But fortunately for them, it was not Zulus. It was Lord Chelmsford's relief column's vanguard. Either way, after the count was done, 351 Zulus lay dead on the battlefield. Nearly every man in the garrison had been wounded, although only 17 British were killed. Estimates of the number of Zulus, of course, vary greatly. Some say at least 500 are thought to have died, including wounded ones who were killed after being captured. The members of Chelmsford Relief Force, along with the station's defenders, had killed and captured wounded Zulus they encountered while witnessing their own deaths at Isandlwana. A report mentioned, "We buried 375 Zulus, and some wounded were thrown into the grave. Seeing the manner in which our wounded had been mutilated after being dragged from the hospital, we were very bitter, and we did not spare the wounded Zulus," wrote NNC Police Trooper William James Clark in his diary. In his book, The Zulu Response to the British Invasion of 1879, Laband agrees with Shepstone's estimate of 600 Zulu casualties. Of course, the official enemy death toll was too low, according to Samuel Pitt, a private in B Company during the battle, who told the Western Mail in 1914, "We reckon we had accounted for 875, but the books will tell you 400 or 500. The day following the battle, an improvised gallows was used for hanging Zulus who supposedly have behaved treacherously, according to a letter written by Lieutenant Horace Smith Dorian, who was a member of the staff of Chelmsford. The 2nd and 24th Foot soldiers received 7 of the 11 Victoria Crosses given to the defenders of Rorke's Drift, the most ever received for a single regiment's action. The Battle of Inkerman, which took place on November 5th, 1854, saw the most awards given in a single day. The 2nd Relief Force of Lucknow, which took place from November 14th to the 22nd of 1857, resulted in 28 awards in a single action. Additionally, 4 distinguished conduct medals were also given out. The extolling of the victory at Rorke's Drift diverted public attention from the great defeat at Isandlwana, and the fact that Lord Chelmsford and Henry Bart Frere had started the war without Her Majesty's government's consent. This high number of bravery awards had been interpreted as a response to the earlier defeat at Isandlwana. The awards given to the defenders at Rorke's Drift reportedly did not impress Sir Garnet Wolseley, who succeeded Lord Chelmsford as Commander-in-Chief later that year. He had said, "It is monstrous, making heroes of those who, shut up in buildings in Rorke's Drift, could not bolt out and fought like rats for their lives, which they could not otherwise save." This claim has been contested by a number of historians, who have emphasized the victory as independent of other considerations. Modern critics suggest such lavishness in commendation was designed to assuage the disaster at Isandlwana and to reassure a skeptical Victorian public that the fighting ability of the British soldier remained unquestioned. Well, shortly after the relief force came, a memorial was built on the location. Additionally, a cemetery was created where the deceased were finally interned. All the memorials still stand, and these days, like so many sites of famous battles, it's a tourist attraction. Well, before we go, let's hear it from Private Henry Hook of the 24th Regiment. Now, he was there at the time, and in 1905, he gave us a pretty good account at the scene after the battle. So this is about the aftermath. Okay? So I'll read it directly from him. "The long night passed, and the day broke. Then we looked around to see us what had happened. There was not a living soul that was not thankful to find the Zulus had had enough of it and were disappearing over the hill to the southwest. Orders were given patrol the ground, collect the arms of the dead blacks, and make our position as strong as possible in case of fresh assaults. One of the first things I did was go up to the man who was looking over our breastworks with his rifle presented to the spot where so many Zulus had been. I went up to him. He didn't move. He looked very quiet. I went nearer. I said, 'Hello, what are you doing here?' He made no answer and did not stir, and I went still closer and something in his appearance made me tilt his helmet back, as you sometimes tilt back a hat when you want to look closely in the face. As I did, so I saw a bullet mark in his forehead, and I knew that he was dead. I went right away, and was walking up the dry bed of a little stream near the drift with my own rifle in my right hand and a bunch of assegais over my left shoulder. Suddenly I came across an unarmed Zulu lying on the ground, apparently dead, but bleeding from the leg. Thinking it strange that a dead man should bleed, I hesitated and wondered whether I should go on, as other Zulus might be lurking about. But I resumed my task. Just as I was passing, the supposed dead man seized the butt of my rifle and tried to drag it away. The bunch of assegais rattled to the earth. The Zulu suddenly released his grip of the rifle with one hand, and with the other fiercely endeavored to drag me down. The fight was short and sharp, but it ended by the Zulu being struck in the chest with the butt and knocked to the ground. The rest was very quickly over. There was no time for me to sit down, no time to mope, and there was sick and wounded, as well as the rest to look after. So when the Commander-in-Chief arrived, I was back at my cooking in my shirt sleeves, making tea for the sick. The sergeant ran up and said, "Lieutenant Bromhead wants you." "Wait till I put my coat on," I said. "Come as you are, straight away," he ordered. And with my braces hanging about me, I went into the midst of the officers. Lord Chelmsford asked me all about the defence of the hospital, as I was the last to leave the building. An officer took our names. He wrote down what we'd done. And when the relief had come up to the men of the column that were sent out to bury the Zulus, there were 351 dead blacks counted, and these were put into 2 big holes in front of the hospital. The column was made the Kaffirs who were with them to dig the trenches. But although they dug the holes, they positively refused to bury the bodies. There were only a few badly wounded left, as the Zulus had carried off their wounded as they retreated. A great many dead were found in the mealie field, not far from the hospital. As for our own comrades, we buried them. This was done the day after the fight, not far from the place where they had fell, and at the foot of the hill. It was soon afterwards that the cemetery was walled in, and a monument was put up in the middle. The lettering was cut on it by a bandsman named Melsop, who used bits as broken bayonets as chisels. He drew a capital picture of the fight. Those who had been killed in action were buried on the one side of the cemetery, and those who had died of disease on the other. A curious thing was that a civilian named Byrne, who had taken part in the defense and was killed, was buried outside the cemetery wall. I don't know why, except that he was not a regular soldier. Okay, and now we reach the end of the Battle of Rorke's Drift. Now I will admit, the first time that I heard about this was from the movie Zulu, which I have mentioned, and the second time when my memory was piqued was when Sabaton came out. I think it was the album The Last Stand. I think it was The Last Stand. They had the song about Rorke's Drift on there, which of course made it seem as heroic as ever. I don't know, I haven't listened to that band in a long time. It seems they've kind of fell off. Their songs all kind of sound the same now. But I did like that album, The Last Stand.
Anyway, that's got nothing to do with the video at hand. I'm just commenting on the tail end. Now let me thank the top tier patrons: Dark, Kerry, Kimberly, Ember, Ben, Britt, Charles, Erin, James, Jeffrey, Melissa, Scott, Stark Factory, Wendy, Jaden, Sherry, Jessica, Christine, Sally, Katiana, Christine, Fizarbo, Legitimus, Maverick, Susan, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Cameron, Alexander, Daniel, JR, and Charlene. And I think that will do us for today. Once again, I hope you've enjoyed it. And I will see you in the next video. Whenever we meet again, that is up to you. Good night, my friend, wherever you are. As always, wish you a good rest and lots of love to you all.